Welcome along to this Stirling build. As you can see, I've done a bit of pre-assembly and full disclosure, I recorded quite a bit of build work with a headset camera, and when I looked at the footage it was just awful. So I ended up buying a new camera, sort of steady cam, and you'll see some of that footage later on. But yeah, what you can see here is just me doing some initial assembly work. And I'm just adding a panel line wash to these interior areas here. Now, of course, you're going to see hardly any of this, but it's nice to see it. And here you can see we've jumped ahead massively. And before we close all of this up, I wanted to show you how wonderfully detailed this is, and some of the work that I put in to make it so. So you can see you've scratch built some maps there. We've got some interior dust washes there. We've called out the dials and things, and we've got the photo etched throttle levers. But yeah, all in all, a really nice interior. And like I say, one that I did capture it. It's just, the footage was terrible. So I've binned that, and this is a slightly odd video as a result. Here you can see the new overhead Steadicam. And what I want to show you here is the build in real time. So this is me putting together the twin tail wheel. And you can see we're gluing the area, we're using tweezers to place the part. And yeah, it's a very delicate process, this. And once that's now sorted, we can add a bit of extra glue just to really ensure that that is attached. Here we're doing some work on the turrets, which are built separately. And again, you can see just how fiddly this is. This is the joy of 1/72nd scale. Of course, there are those modelers who tackle 1/4/4 scale, which is even smaller. And to them, I say, well done. Okay, we're doing some photo etch work here. And this is one of the sort of table sections in the rear of the fuselage. So you saw me earlier spraying that with matte black. And here I am using my scalpel as a edge piece. Of course, you can spend money on photo etch vice clamp tools, and depending on just how elaborate the photo etch is will depend on whether that's a worthy investment or not. And you can see I am about to attach that along with some other parts of this tail section of the fuselage. Just adding a bit of glue there to hold that in place. And as you can see, we're using Tamiya liquid cement. Here I'm using PVA glue to tack the photo etch. This is a cage around the fire extinguisher. Here's the curtain, and this is the table that we made earlier. Again, just dipping that in PVA glue so that that can then sit in place like so. And just to give you an idea of just the level of detail on this kit, you can see we've got a silver bucket as well that's going to sit on top of that table. And there's the fire extinguisher as well. And here's the inside of the door, and there is my finger for scale. And I'm really happy with how the wash worked on that. Same with the ribbing there. You know, this is really nicely detailed. Of course, you're not going to see hardly any of it once this is closed up, but this is the beauty of social media. I can record all of this before we close it up. And yeah, for one last look. Of course, be careful of the turret falling out. Yeah, then we close those fuselage halves together, and only those of us watching this video and myself will know that that is there. So I'm just pinning this at this stage. So taking section by section and letting the liquid cement hold those together before we then move further down, and then using clamps and masking tape to hold that in place. The problem with this kit is that we had a really nasty step. The fitment wasn't great, and what you'll see at a later stage is me sanding and filling that and then rescribing those panel lines. As if by magic, here is me sanding down that spine. I can't remember what grain I used here, but what I'm doing here is adding the liquid cement to melt that powder in the hope that it will create a more unified bond. And it does work quite well, though you can hear with my fingernail that that's not quite working. So this is where we turn to Vallejo putty, and of all the different fillers that I've found, I really love this one because of the precise applicator. Enables you to put filler right where you need it rather than creating extra lumps and bumps. And I'm just using a cotton bud to smooth that out, and then we will let that dry before we carry on sanding. And you can see the way the putty is filling up that gap on one side versus the other. And once we're happy, we can start to rescribe those panel lines, which were beautiful on the model, but of course we've sanded them down now, so we need to rescribe them. And I've got a nice fresh blade here, being very careful not to cut myself. And there's also the rivet detail that we've lost. So I've got my riveting tool here, and I am rescribing those details as well. And then obviously we'll have some rough edges. So again, using the extra thin cement to melt those down and just to soften it a little bit. Most of it will evaporate before it It damages the plastic, but it does work very well to melt the plastic together. And yes, you can see a line there, but generally speaking, that's a much smoother finish. We're almost ready for some paint. So before we do that, we need to start masking up some of the areas. And you can see the bomb aimer's windows there were all masked up. And then I'm using masking tape that is pretty much to size. And I'm moving that across like so. And then I have this cocktail stick to press that tape right down up against the contours of the plastic, which is nicely molded. And there you can see the demarcation of the plastic there. And then I want a very sharp, fresh scalpel. And I want to very carefully, so as not to damage the clear parts, cut away along those ridges. And that will create a nice mask effect. And as you can see here, I can then pull away the bits I don't need, leaving behind a nicely masked bit of window. And here we are fully masked up and ready for paint. So normally I would black base my aircraft, and for a World War II Bomber Command RAF bomber, which is pretty much all black, you'd think I'd do the same. However, as you can see here, I am pre-shading, and I'm then filling in those gaps with some different colours. Now, I've seen this technique done a lot on Instagram and was very curious to try it. I wasn't 100% convinced, I'll be honest, which is why I thought this would be a very good subject to try it on. But actually, I think it's worked really well, and you'll see that later on. These multicolours really do create an extra contrast and a subtleness to the paint finish. But yeah, that's what's going on here. I haven't completely lost my mind. And then very lightly now, with a matte black, we are going over, and you can just about see those different colours poking through. And yeah, that's the whole underside done, and we're ready to, once that's dry, mask that up, ready for the camouflaged upper surfaces. And that's what I'm doing here. And there's a nice natural line in the panels, which we can use as our demarcation point to put the tape along there and be ready for paint. Et voila. And here you can see the scheme that I'm going with. And I'm using Vallejo's Air War Colour Series, RAF Colours Bomber and Training Command. And this is a pre-designed set, and as you can see, the earth colour is pretty accurate. And what I've always struggled with is to get the green right. Now, Hataka do a really good green. This is me using the AK putty to mask the different areas. But yeah, this is the green that comes in that set. And I've done a small section here to test it. And I'll be honest, when I first saw this come out, I thought it was horribly wrong. But I let it dry and peeled the putty away just to see the contrast. And you'll see in the next clip, there we go, once it's dry, it looks spot on. So yeah, I think I've now found the colour that I'm looking for, and ready to get some more of the AK putty on, and I think I'll probably do a full tutorial video on AK putty, because I think it's a brilliant addition to any modeller's toolset, and you can see I'm using it here and it works brilliantly. But yes, I'm painting these panel by panel with multiple coats so that we can really get that gorgeous colour scheme. And here's the first wing going together, top and bottom. And as you can see, the undercarriage goes on to begin with. So we've then had to sand down the edge there. But yeah, ultimately the wings are looking okay. And here we are making the undercarriage for the second wing. And at this point I discovered that I love the idea of a super zoom to capture this footage. But yeah, so you build the undercarriage, and then that builds into the lower wing section, and then the upper wing goes on top, and as you saw earlier, they come together. Here's me removing the mask from the wheel and tyres, and there you have it. That's the wing built. Then we can turn our attention to the engines. So we pre-painted these silver, and we're just using a black wash to call out the detail in those cylinder heads, and when the camera gets into focus, there we go. So we're now ready to start with the decals. So we're using micro set to set the decals. Got a nice soft paintbrush, and we paint the area very liberally with where we want to place the decal, and then that sits on like so. We then position the decal, and then taking a cotton bud, we squeeze out any of the air and bubbles, and then we use a hairdryer to soften the decal to really help it to adhere to all of those beautiful panel lines that Italeri have supplied us with this kit. And there you can see that's looking pretty good. And here we're working with some photo etch on the engines, working on the cowling section, and here they are coming together quite nicely. And now we are ready for a panel wash. So this is the same Black Knight panel wash that we used earlier, and you can see I've started doing that here. And in a wonderful example of how not to apply this, I forgot to wipe the brush, and blob, there is a big dollop. But as you can see, it flows nicely into the contours of these panel lines, and yeah, leaves you looking pretty good. Now, for some further weathering, we're going to use these streaker brushes, again from Ammo, and there you can see what the wing looks like with those applied. And essentially all you do is you dab in random areas with the colour that you have chosen, and then you take a weathering brush. I use this one for dry brushing, and you then, like so, blend that in. And obviously, because you're using a dry brush, that colour pigment will spread further. And if you need to thin it even further because you've got too much of a dark streak, you can use a little bit of thinners. There's some work done on the leading edge, and this is now ready for the seal of approval. So again, we're using matte varnish from Ammo, and just giving that all over coverage. And there's the upper surface looking really good. Very happy with that. And now we can turn our attention to the bomb bays and the undercarriage doors. You can see the bomb racks included there in there. And I'm just using some tweezers there to hold that position into place rather. You can see the weathering on the underside as well. Here we are using some cotton buds to hold the bomb bay doors in place. And we are ready to reveal the final kit by removing the masking. This is always a satisfying moment. But here we have the final kit. Now, I have to say, I am really chuffed with how this has turned out. It's definitely a marked improvement on Airfix's classic one. And yeah, let's face it, there's not really many Stirlings on the market. Even these Italeri ones are hard to come by now. But I'm sure you'll be able to get them on eBay, and I'm sure they'll re-release it at different points in the future. But here you can see just how little of that detail is visible. But we know it's there, and we can just about see it. But yeah, really happy with the paint job and the weathering effect. The decals have conformed really quite nicely to all of those panel lines. And yeah, this was an absolutely huge aircraft. And you can really get the impression of its scale with these shots. Now, I'm sure if I shone a torch in here, we would see a little bit more. But even with that door open, there's very little visible of all of that lovely interior that we did. But yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. And if you're not already, do think about subscribing. And yeah, I will catch you on the next videos. Catch you next time, guys. Bye.